接下来下一场是这个美国网络安全暨基础设施安全局，也就是这个 CISA 的 Thomas Miller 为我们带来的这个演讲。那他会就是介绍一些就是说这些各种基础设施，无论是亚太区的，还是说在美国遇到的这些之类的这种问题，然后他们目前的一些状况。那the next session will welcome Thomas Miller from the CISA to talk about some of the threats that is faced by the infrastructures in the U.S. and in Asia Pacific. So it is rare to have someone this high level from CISA to talk about something like this, and in the eve of Thanksgiving. So let's welcome Thomas Miller with a round of applause. 那我们欢迎Thomas Miller 带来的演讲。
All right. I guess everybody can hear me now. Do I have an echo there?
Everything is fine.
Okay, great. All right, let's get started. Good morning, I guess, to everyone. I'm Tom Millar from the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's a great honor to be able to talk to you today. And I really hope that I give you some information that you can use, as well as give you some new information about sort of what my agency is and what we do in the United States, the top threats that we're concerned about, and how we can better work together to deal with those threats going forward. So onto the presentation, I suppose. So here's the outline of what I'm going to talk to you about today. First, we're going to give a little bit of background about CISA to explain what we are as well as what we are not. Then we're going to talk about the top threat to U.S. critical infrastructure today, since that's one of the number one things that CISA is responsible for trying to protect in the United States. We're going to talk about different ways we are trying to fight that top threat, going into how we can work together collaboratively, how we already do it in the United States, and how we do it internationally as well. And then I hope we have a lot of time at the end for questions and answers as well, because I'm really looking forward to the questions you have, and hopefully I can give you some really informative answers. So what is CISA? And we call ourselves the Nation's Risk Advisor. And the reason we say Nation's Risk Advisor is because we are not a cyber regulator. We don't go around imposing penalties on people for having poor cybersecurity practices. We do make recommendations on how people can improve their cybersecurity posture. We perform assessments. We perform assessments of people's cybersecurity posture to let them know where they can improve. We also perform incident response in case of cybersecurity incidents. We perform hunts. So when we know about different types of threats and indicators of compromise, we will send teams out to certain organizations to perform a hunt action, which is a proactive way of finding a threat that may already be in your environment that you're not aware of. And we develop lots and lots of recommendations and guidance that are targeted at different audiences throughout the United States and abroad, because any of our allies and partners can take advantage of the recommendations and the information that we publish. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation today. And hopefully there's some stuff that you can use as well. And our key constituents and partners, or stakeholders, as we sometimes say, include all of the U.S. federal government agencies, with a few exceptions, but the vast majority of the U.S. federal government falls under sort of our purview, and U.S. critical infrastructure. And the way we divide up critical infrastructure is there are 16 different sectors within the United States that we're most concerned with. Those include everything from government facilities, including like schools, to healthcare and human services like hospitals and hospital networks, as well as the chemical sector, the energy sector, different types of critical manufacturing, transportation, and various others, as you can imagine. So it's a very, very broad mission. We have a wide scope, a lot of different, thousands and thousands actually of different organizations that we're trying to help protect from cybersecurity threats, as well as other types of infrastructure threats. I should point out, I'm definitely on the cybersecurity side, and that's the most important for the talk today, obviously. But we also do things for infrastructure security, like how to secure federal buildings, or how to secure widely attended gatherings, like sporting events, for example, are something that we're also concerned with protecting. And so that brings us to the number one threat to that critical infrastructure that we're concerned with. The number one cybersecurity threat is definitely ransomware. I even have a colleague who likes to joke that the top three threats to critical infrastructure are ransomware, ransomware, and ransomware. That's because it's disruptive by design. When other types of cyber threats commit a compromise of a critical infrastructure network, usually it's not to be disruptive. Maybe they're trying to steal, economic intelligence or industrial espionage or something like that. But that doesn't break the infrastructure down. It doesn't cause things to fall out of operations for a period of time. And that's a huge concern for us, because we know in recent cases we've had incidents that affect energy, food and agriculture supply chain, and our hospital networks. And all of those things have led to really severe costs to our society and our way of life. You can imagine if certain types of food stop becoming available, that makes it difficult for families to feed themselves. When the Colonial Pipeline incident occurred in May of this year, that was a ransomware incident, and that caused severe impacts to the energy supply chain for probably half of the east coast of the United States, if not more, for quite a long period of time. And that was very difficult for people trying to just put gas in their car. And also hospital networks is a huge concern. If ransomware knocks out a single hospital in a region, and we're already under pressure from or strain, I should say, if we're already under strain from the pandemic as it's ongoing, then you can imagine the effects that has on people's health, because they can't get access to treatment as quickly as they would normally, because you've got one hospital that's having to redirect patients because they can't support, say, imaging is down, right? Or some other function of the hospital doesn't work because of ransomware. And these attacks are occurring all the time. They are on a daily basis across all different sectors of critical infrastructure and all different sizes of organizations. It used to be, I think, that we considered ransomware not as great of a threat as it has been in the last couple of years, because ransomware mostly targeted smaller organizations, and the amounts of money that were being demanded were not as large as they are now. So now ransomware is more disruptive, more sophisticated, and they've gotten much more audacious in the different types of organizations that they're targeting for attacks. So, how do we work together to try and defeat ransomware? So, in the United States, we work with different agencies throughout the government and with our private sector partners, especially in cyber threat intelligence, in the IT sector and the telecom sector, to combat the threat. Our main partner agencies, obviously, are our law enforcement partners. They perform investigations and bring charges and try to interdict and disrupt the operations of ransomware gangs. So that would be the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as the United States Secret Service. And then the Treasury Department can lay sanctions against different recipients of funds, which means that it becomes illegal to pay those people. And that's another way that we can possibly disrupt their operations, is making it illegal to pay them off, so that there's no way for them to actually collect the ransom. We also work with our defense agencies, diplomatic and intelligence agencies, all work together to, as we say, take the fight to the enemy, which is to to make it clear to countries that host ransomware activity that it's unacceptable to us, and also where possible, possibly trying to disrupt their infrastructure. And lastly, last but not least, CISA is leading the effort to harden the targets for ransomware. We want to make systems more secure and resilient, and make sure that our critical infrastructure is not a low-hanging fruit for these criminal gangs that are profiting off of ransoms. So now I'm going to go into more detail and talk specifically about that effort to make systems more secure and resilient, and walk through some of the resources we've already made available on that front. So this is the main page of our stopransomware.gov website, which has a huge amount of resources available to everyone for free, on explaining what ransomware is, obviously, helping people respond to ransomware if they've been attacked, and most importantly, helping them prepare and prevent their organization from being hit by ransomware in the first place. So we have lots of different resources available on stopransomware.gov. There's about a 22-page guide that goes into lots of technical information on how to protect your organization from ransomware attacks, and also includes incident response checklists in case the worst case scenario does happen and you are affected by ransomware. There's also specific guides on this site for different audiences. Like I've already talked about healthcare quite a bit. We have a special page for healthcare under this site in the resources section. We have another one for educational organizations, because we knew that especially when schools started going to mostly remote learning during the worst phases of the pandemic here, we were concerned that schools were going to be hit more often by ransomware and knocked out of operations, and we wanted to help them protect themselves as well. So there's a ton of resources on this site. If you are concerned about ransomware or want to learn more about how we're dealing with the threat, I'd advise everyone to try and check it out, and just browse around or use the classic search bar to find out if we have anything specific to your industry or sector. Next is our bad practices page. This is something that we started publishing just very recently, and everybody's heard of best practices. Bad practices are the things that you shouldn't do ever, because they're a great way to get compromised, and it's an extremely short list. We told ourselves when we started publishing the bad practices that we wanted to make sure that we didn't get to any more than 7 or so, because we didn't want to overwhelm people with all the things not to do. As it stands, there's a list of only 3. And I'll tell you right now, they're very simple. The first one is not to use unsupported or end-of-life software. So no more on-premise Windows 2008 server. We know that the bad guys love that sort of thing when they find it during their reconnaissance phase, because there's tons of vulnerabilities that are very easily exploited that way. So we want people to try and eliminate all of the end-of-life software in their environment to the greatest extent possible. And if there is any sort of use case where end-of-life software is required, and we know that those use cases do exist in critical infrastructure, unfortunately, that those systems are protected and segmented as best as possible. So in case they are compromised, it doesn't lead to a compromise of the rest of the network. The second bad practice is no use of default, known, or unchangeable passwords, especially for critical systems. But in any case, we all know that weak passwords are a really bad idea, but we know that, known, default, and unchangeable passwords are still a fact of life in a lot of places. So we put that on the bad practices list because, again, it's something that the bad guys know how to identify and quickly take advantage of. And then that leads to a compromise of your systems and data. And lastly, the third bad practice is the use of single-factor authentication for remote or administrative access. And that means basically that everyone who is using remote access should be using some kind of token other than just a password to authenticate and get access to the network. Here at the Department of Homeland Security, which is the parent agency of CISA, everyone uses an ID smart card with their laptop or derived credentials with their mobile devices, so that everything has at least a second factor of not only something you know, which is your PIN, but also something you have, which is your ID card. So that's how we make sure that everything is multi-factor for our remote access. We encourage everybody else to do similar. Again, in some cases, we know none of these are necessarily inexpensive investments for people to adopt, but we do know that if you don't avoid the bad practices, again, you will find yourself compromised sooner rather than later. From our own experiences, our own incident response, and as well as the experience of others that we've worked with. The next thing I want to talk about is our alerts. We have a system we call the National Cyber Awareness System, which is sort of a combination of RSS feeds, social media, and email subscription lists, all of which are ways to get access to the same information. And these are all of the alerts that we publish on various things. Here I'm just sharing an alert that we published back in October on the Black Matter ransomware. We suspect Black Matter is possibly a rebranding of another ransomware family that was involved in some pretty critical incidents previously. And now we know that this new rebranded Black Matter ransomware has targeted multiple critical infrastructure entities as well. And so we use these alerts to get the word out and share indicators of compromise with our partners and all of the people who subscribe to them. And these are freely available to everyone. So I would suggest if you're interested in getting free public threat intelligence from CISA, or just having a situational awareness of what we're most concerned with on any given moment, you can go to our website and sign up for these alerts and get them however you want, RSS or email, or just follow our social media. But we publish a lot of this type of thing just to make sure everybody else can stay abreast on the most emerging threats. And lastly, and then we're going to stop talking about all the free stuff. I wanted to share with you this tool that we've developed and share with everybody, which is called the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool. That's what the CSET stands for. And the most recent version of it includes a ransomware readiness assessment module. And this is a standalone tool. You can download it and run it whenever you want at your leisure. It does not send any data back to CISA. So your data that you enter into the assessment tool stays private. And what it is basically a questionnaire. You run the assessment, answer the questions about your own organization and your posture, and it will feed back to you a different set of depending on your answers, it will feed back to you recommendations on what you can do to improve your cybersecurity posture and better protect your organization. And so that's all of the stuff that we're doing to help shore up sort of like the critical infrastructure in the United States, just sort of independently as CISA. But all of this happens in collaboration with our partners. Like I said, in a lot of these cases, when we're talking about what really is what really are the bad practices, or what should we publish in our next alert, or where can we collect the most valuable and timely threat intelligence, we're doing that in partnership with allies and allies around the world, and with private sector, and with our critical infrastructure partners, and with our sister agencies, and with our counterpart agencies in other countries. We know that we have been able to alert potential victims before the ransomware fires, so to speak, or detonates, so that you can see, for example, that the initial infection or initial compromise will call back to a command and control system. If we work together, we can identify the command and control callback before the ransomware itself has been dropped and detonated. And if we're able to do that, we sometimes have a window of a matter of hours, but we can get the word to certain organizations before that detonation period and they've been able to protect themselves and minimize the impact of the ransomware. So that's been tremendously powerful. We, again, like I said, getting this threat intelligence, compiling all this information and sharing it in a timely fashion, all of that is enabled by partnerships, both domestic and international. And those can be formal organizations like our information sharing and analysis centers, like we have here in the U.S. that represent each sector. Information sharing and analysis organizations, which is slightly different, are sanctioned a little bit differently by the government, but perform most of the same functions. And all of these are sort of formal membership organizations. Usually there's dues or membership fees, and you get, sort of nominated into the Information Sharing and Analysis Center by your home organization that's paying your dues. And then there's volunteer groups. So there can be people who just meet at conferences like this one right here today and form Slack channels or form mailing lists or whatever your communication channel of choice is, and then share in threat intelligence and answer each other's questions and tackle the bad guys together that way. So there's many different ways to collaborate. We try to leverage as many of them as we possibly can within the bounds of the law, as you can imagine, and encourage you to also join your local trust groups, participate in your information sharing and analysis centers or the counterparts to those in your countries, and work with us. So that concludes my prepared remarks for today. I'm sorry if I went through that a little bit quickly, but I wanted to save a lot of time for question and answer. So thank you again for having me. This has been an honor to speak today, and really looking forward to your questions. Thank you again.
Okay, yeah. So thanks again, Thomas, for coming on the Thanksgiving night. Yep. 那大家有什么问题有想要问他的吗？或可以就是问中文的也可以。那我先来问一个问题好了。So I have one question. So just now you mentioned one of the most important thing about the bad practices is to run legacy softwares like Windows Server 2008 or those softwares that's not supported. But I think one of the issues that I've seen with some of these critical infrastructure is that those critical infrastructures are underfunded. So there's a problem whereby we have a hard time trying to convince them to kind of migrate from these systems. And sometimes these systems are running a lot of their, are tangled with the rest of their infrastructure. So it can be pretty difficult or costly to do. So what's kind of the general strategy for those, especially for the private entities, whereby we cannot just fund them directly?
So one thing we have, this is going to be I realize, we have a lot of different people in the audience here today, but pretend this is kind of an off the record, off the cuff remark. One thing we have started talking about a little bit within CISA is whether it would help for us to have a grant making authority, so that we could provide different organizations with funds to improve that situation. Unfortunately, I don't think that solves, just having the money doesn't always solve the problem, because it can be a big supply chain problem. I have a friend of mine who works at an academic institution who was just now telling me he was trying to install some completely unsupported version of Windows onto a machine, specifically because it was connected to a milling station. So it works in the architecture school, and they use a lot of different milling stations. They use actual industrial control systems there to teach the students how to interact with different types of metalworking tools and lathes and things of that nature. So he's got to install Windows. I can't remember which version, but it's way out of date. And it's only because the software to run the mill or the lathe only works on that version of Windows. And we know this is just a microcosm of what the situation is like in critical infrastructure, because it's not enough to say, you know, like, oh, you have to invest in this. It's like, can you really replace the machinery? And you may even have machinery that no longer, you know, is no longer supported with modern software, just because of the supply chain for these devices and how things get, you know, companies get bought, or you know, they get involved in mergers. All this sort of stuff changes about the economics of software and what has to work with what. So just being able to throw money at the problem doesn't necessarily solve the issue. What we wanted to do when we published that bad practice, though, what we really wanted to start to have that difficult conversation about, you know, like, why is there so much unsupported software, especially in critical infrastructure, and what are the investment decisions that need to be made to change that, and where do they belong in the supply chain? One of the other effects we wanted to have with that bad practice was to have a conversation with cybersecurity insurers. So, like, say if a cybersecurity insurance, you ask a cybersecurity insurance company for a policy, and then they find out you're running a lot of unsupported software, then that might create additional costs for your policy, or you might be deemed uninsurable, period. And that turns investment decisions around very quickly, right? Because you think, oh, I can offset risk by buying cybersecurity insurance. Go find out, because we run so much unsupported software, the cybersecurity insurance is now very expensive. Well, we could save money on this investment to buy down risk by buying down risk in other places. So those are the conversations we were trying to start. And it is a very difficult, I guess this long rambling answer is just a way of saying, like, yeah, it's a very difficult, complex thing. We tried to boil it down to one bad practice, though, to start that conversation about how to solve that difficult problem.
Okay, cool. So the general idea is that it is a difficult problem, and we can't just throw money at it. And we try to set the right incentives, like having higher insurance premiums for organizations that run these legacy softwares. So that's kind of the general idea, right?
That's right.
Cool. Yeah, 所以刚才就是我们问他说，就是目前我们这种基础设施常常会有一些跑旧的软体嘛，因为他刚刚有提到其中一个 bad practice 就是说，这个跑旧的软体，例如说跑 Windows XP 啊之类的，那他们就刚才就是问他讲说，那面对这种状况，常常有很多客户不愿意换，或者说不愿意投资去把他的系统更新，那怎么处理？那他讲说，有时候不一定是砸钱就可以解决，那就是说可能可以说透过一些给他们对的这种规则，就是说例如说可能会要求说他们要有保资安险，但是这种资安险可能如果发现说你内部有很多旧的设施的话，那就会有很贵的这个保险费，那这个上面的老板就会想说，哦，那这保险费那么贵，那我是不是就该投资我的资安的这种基础设施？好，那对，那像大家有没有什么大家有问题啊，或者想
How here is the question. Does CISA require agency or sectors to patch nearly 300 vulnerabilities? How could CISA make sure the government sectors or agency already patch these vulnerabilities?
So we have some visibility into the operating system status of at least the parts of the federal government that we're tasked with securing. So every government agency runs its own IT, but we have visibility into different host-based agents that tell us the status of at least some of the endpoints in their networks. So we have some visibility into their patch status that way. The other main way that we determine whether they've patched according to our directions is simple attestation. So we will just do a data call. We just ask the question, report the number of systems or the percentage of systems that have been patched, and they have to tell us. And the enforcement of this is not done by CISA per se. It's actually done by the Inspector General of that agency, which actually gives it a little bit more weight, because you can't run from the Inspector General, and they will publish what they find if it turns out that you're not up to date.
Thank you.
OK, thanks. 那然后线上会众就说也可以透过就是我们 Slido 来这个提问题。那现场大家还有没有什么有想要跟他？好，请。
Hey, hello, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you for your talk. It's very impressive. But I'm very interested about the ransomware because many Taiwan vendor is also being compromised by the ransomware group. In the past, we thought that the law enforcement may be useless in the case of ransomware because they may not located in US or Taiwan. So our law enforcement may not have the power to take down them. But however, recently we have noticed that many groups like the Black Matter is being shut down. And in it because some pressure from the US law enforcement government. So I would like to know why US government and maybe CISA take an important role here that can take down this ransomware group, and what is CISA's position when we do this takedown operation? Yes, thank you.
Can the microphone was a little bit distorted on that question. Can I get a repeat or?
Okay.
Or generally, what he's asking is, how does the U.S. Like just now he mentioned that the threat actors are not in Taiwan or in U.S. So he's wondering how the U.S. took down those ransomware threat actors. That's the okay. Yeah, that's what he's asking.
All right. Well, so generally, we will for takedowns, which CISA's role in a takedown is to do victim notification for organizations that are already infected with the malicious code that we're concerned about. But we work very closely in coordination with our partners, who are usually a combination of law enforcement and private sector when a takedown occurs. So in most of the cases where we've done takedowns, it's because of the FBI working together with the private sector in very close coordination, where both the private sector side and the FBI will have access to specific information that's really key, and they share that information and coordinate when they want to do the takedown, and then on a particular date and hour when they've decided they can seize all of the evidence that they want to make the case. Excuse me. They I should say, big we, not CISA, but they, the law enforcement agencies, especially with the cooperation of Interpol, for example, or Europol, go in and seize the evidence that they need and disrupt the infrastructure. It's basically a combination usually of private sector and law enforcement agencies, and then CISA is basically doing domestic victim notification. That's all we do.
Yeah, understand. Thank you. And the other small question is that the CISA has a project called Stop Ransomware, and we also know that there are the other group that called Normal Ransom. So what do you think was the difference between these two groups? Yeah, it's clear or?
I think you might be holding the microphone a little too close.
Oh, too close. Okay. Yeah, is that better? Oh, yes. Yeah, my question is that I know CISA has a project called Stop Ransomware, and we also know that the other group is called Normal Ransom. And I wonder what's the difference, in your opinion, between these two groups?
Well, Stop Ransomware is our page mostly for resources to help you prevent and respond. No More Ransom is largely a group of, it's got Europol involvement, so there are government agencies involved. but it's largely a group of private sector partnerships working together, and they are sharing. My understanding of No More Ransom is that their main goal is to share as many decryption keys as possible, so that if you are victimized by ransomware, you can visit nomoreransom.org and hopefully get the decryption key if it's already known, and then you render the attack. You can just decrypt all of your data that way. But the thing about the adversaries in this case is that they watch No More Ransom and they know when their keys have been published. So it's kind of a it's a constant struggle to try and stay ahead of them. As soon as like we publish keys, then they change their keys, and it's never ending that way. But I admire the work that they're doing, and I think the only reason that we have not. Actually, you know what? I'm not really sure why there's not like a direct partnership between what we're doing on StopRansomware.gov and nomoreransom.org.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
OK， 好，thanks，那现场大家还有什么问题吗？如果没有的话，那我再来问一个。I have another question. So one of the issue with the cryptocurrency or ransomware is that the ransoms are paid through cryptocurrency, and there are advancements in the cryptocurrency space. For instance, right now most of them demand bitcoins, and Bitcoin is traceable, so that makes law enforcement much easier. But there are more anonymous or currencies like Monero available. So if say the threat actors say they switch to this sort of more less traceable cryptocurrencies for their say ransomware operations, what do you think is the best response in this kind of situations?
I can't speak to that very well, unfortunately. I wish I did have more detailed knowledge of that aspect of countering ransomware and disrupting their operations. But that those issues fall almost entirely under the responsibilities of our law enforcement partners and the Treasury Department. That's not like CISA doesn't typically concern itself with. I mean, we just tell everybody to not pay. That's the official U.S. government policy, is to recommend everybody do not pay the ransom. And that's why StopRansomware.gov is full of so much advice on how to make sure that you've got offline backups so that you can restore yourself back to operations without having to worry about paying the ransom. So we're not we don't concern ourselves too much with the aspects of how they're trying to monetize this. We want to prevent the harm from being done in the first place, or minimize the harm by making sure everybody has a great incident response plan.
I see. So from a CISA standpoint, the primary goal is to enforce, maybe recommend preventive measures and to guide the victims if they get hacked, but not deal with the investigations or law enforcement.
Right. If you think about it. One metaphor we like to use for our incident response work is that we're more like the emergency services in the fire department. We show up and we want to make sure that everybody is safe and sound and can get out of the building and with all of their loved ones, and everybody survives. We don't care too much about who did it. There's police that show up, and that would be our partners in the FBI, and they're very concerned with who did it, who's responsible, how they're going to build the case, and make sure that they can't get away with it so they don't do it again. But we're there to make sure everybody is safe and sound. So that's the difference in our responsibilities when it comes to incident response.
That's a very, very, very good analogy. I think a lot of people will understand better that way. Yeah, 所以他刚才就提到是说CISA 的角色有点像就是说我们的消防队一样，就是如果有失火的时候，他们就会去现场去把人都救出来，所以就好像有人被这个 ransomware 攻击的时候，他们会辅导这个受害者，但是他们还会有一些就是 合作伙伴，例如说像消防队有这个警察是他们的合作伙伴嘛，警察会把那个凶手找出来，所以不过这件事情就不是消防员的事情，所以某种程度上来说 ，CISA 不是负责把这个受害攻击者找出来的这个组织。那现场大家还有什么想要跟他提问或者想要讨论的？多了解交流的部分嘛。那没有的话，刚才slide 上的问题我有一个，那我把它问出来。So there is a question from one of our online participants, and the question is, in Taiwan or U.S., we frequently get hacked by one of the state actors, but I'm not going to name the country to avoid being too political. And what's the general directions or guidance on how to prevent those state actor hacking incidents?
I'll have to say this, right? The thing is that the reason they're called advanced persistent threats, or the reason we started calling them that, and I don't think CISA came up with that term. That was an industry term, and then we just sort of adopted it. But the reason they're called that is because they do use sophisticated tools, but most importantly, they are very persistent. And based on our experience, the thing is that we know from defending our own agencies against these types of nation-state sponsored intrusions that if these types of threats want to get into an agency and find that data, they will spend enough time they will spend long enough to where they will gain that access. The most important thing in most cases is to detect it as quickly as possible, and then share that information and eradicate their access as quickly as possible. So it's really about, for those types of compromises, I don't think prevention is always making it difficult is important. But prevention is extremely hard because of how much time they're willing to spend, working on phishing your staff and employees, working on, waiting for that one moment when you aren't patched and there's a new 0 day that's floating around in the wild, developing their own 0 days. That is another thing that's extremely difficult to defend against. So all of these things stack in their favor. But the main thing is they want access for long periods of time. That's why they do these intrusions, because they want to compromise you and use you for use your networks for their own intelligence gathering purposes, or to pre-position malware for possibly other purposes down the line. But if you can detect it and eradicate it in a quick fashion, then that renders all of their investment more or less worthless. So I think that's the real lesson to learn here from what we've experienced helping defend our own agencies here in the United States. And that's why we do a lot of those hunt engagements where we just assume there's already a compromise and we go in looking for it so we can eradicate it from the network.
Okay, cool. That's a very different perspective than, because I think a lot of the mindsets is to kind of prevent these hacks, but that's a very interesting kind of way to view it, is to get them out if they get in, instead of like trying to stop them from getting in at all. Yeah. 那我再确认一下现场，大家还有没有问题想要问的？那没有的话，我们就差不多到这边结束。So I think we're about time. So let's end here, and then let's thank Thomas again with a round of applause. Thanks.
No, thank you. This was fun. I had fun.